Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Here on the fastest show in politics. Thank you for making us part of your Monday here on Bloomberg Radio on the satellite channel 121 or on YouTube, however you get us. It's good to have you as part of our conversation. We're going to assemble our panel in a moment as we turn our attention from AI here to mass deportations. I was wondering what we would see over the weekend as the Trump administration invoked the Alien Enemies Act and kicked out a statement saying as much. We talked about this, remember, on Friday a bit. This would be the law last used in World War II, as a matter of fact, in the detention of Japanese Americans, to immediately deport any Venezuelan citizen who the administration says is a member of the criminal gang, Tren de Aragua. You've heard Donald Trump mention this gang, what they call a hybrid criminal state perpetrating an invasion. Therefore, the use of this law to deport dozens of people over the weekend. It went to court as these deportations began. 5 Venezuelans in federal custody filed a class action lawsuit. A U.S. District Court judge then issued a restraining order, said you can't put them on airplanes here. It's the 5 who filed the class action lawsuit said it would violate federal law and the Constitution's guarantee to due process. We found ourselves in a situation where the judge said, turn the planes around and bring the detainees back. The White House chose not to because the airplane was over international waters. It did not get back to Venezuela. Actually went back to El Salvador. 238 detainees put inside a terrorism confinement center where they will be held for at least a year. This has set up a massive legal standoff that some people think is going to go to the Supreme Court, this whole idea of using the Alien Enemies Act. And this would usher in the mass deportations that a lot of people have been waiting for. We've been kind of seeing the administration nibble around the edges here, but the idea of putting hundreds of people on airplanes is more of what Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail, and it's where we begin our conversation with our political panel. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst, and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And our Republican strategist today, John Seaton, is back, founder, CEO, Echo Canyon Consulting. Great to see you both here. Jeannie, is this going to go to the Supreme Court? Because this would be one of the pillars, frankly, of the Trump campaign. Mass deportations, the work that Tom Homan is up to, could hinge on what the court says here.
Yeah, I mean, this very well could. And I think that that is the only potential good news out of this very distressing story over the weekend is that the administration said it will file in the Supreme Court, which is what we want them to do. We want them to file and listen to court orders. Of course, the concern here, as you just went through it beautifully, is that the order given over the weekend, they did not listen to. And so, yes, this very well could go to the court. And we really need to hope that the administration is not openly defying court orders. And that's, of course, the concern and why the timing of the flights and when they landed and all of those kinds of things matter so much. And I would just say, we also need to think about where these folks were sent. President Bukele is defined or described as a millennial authoritarian. He is defined as the coolest dictator in the world. He posts right after these folks landed and he hears about the order, oops, too late, with a laughing emoji that Secretary of State Rubio actually retweets. That is a pretty startling turnabout for Secretary Rubio.
Yeah, Elon Musk retweeted that as well. The oops, too late tweet recirculated by the White House communications director as well. John Seaton, what do you think about this? I think if I'm reading Jeannie correctly here, it's not so much the deportation, but the refusal to turn the plane around when a judge said as much. The White House has been really careful about abiding by the courts, saying that we'll do what the courts say and we will exercise our right to appeal. Was this a good look for the White House?
Right. Well, given where the plane was, and I understand that, there's still some question there. It's unclear whether this was the right legal decision or not. And look, as my often disclaimer, I'm not a constitutional attorney, but I do know politics, and I think the politics of this are actually quite good for the White House. I think after years and years of inaction when it comes to illegal immigration, and certainly illegal immigration. Immigrants who wind up causing mischief on our soil, joining gangs and that kind of thing. President Trump on the campaign trail was extremely clear that those folks would be sent out. And so as this winds its way through the courts, I do think that we need to keep our eye on the politics as well. And I think the politics here are really good for the Trump administration and the White House.
Jeannie, we heard from the press secretary following this. By the way, the judge made this order from the bench 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. And by the way, to John's point, let's be clear. No one here is a legal analyst. This is politics we're talking about. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, says the order, which had no lawful basis, was issued after the terrorist TDA aliens had already been removed from U.S. territory. The written order, referring to the judge here, and the administration's actions do not conflict. Do they not have a case to make there?
They have a case to make, and we'll have to hear. The judge is going to hold a hearing today on this and try to get down to what happened and who knew and what. The problem is his remedies, his hands are pretty much tied. There's not a lot he could do beyond issuing a contempt order, which really has no teeth. And that's, again, if he found that they had defied a court order. But the reality is that this is why the politics being in Donald Trump's favor are why they are testing this aggrandizement of power with very, very unsavory characters potentially. Although, again, we don't know because there's then no proof that all 130 plus of these people were members of this gang. But let's not forget, this matters to all of us because what have we been taught from the time we were school children? That, as Felix Frankfurter said many years ago, the rights and liberties we enjoy, we have gained on the backs of some very not nice people. That's a quote. And that is absolutely true. And you have to think about that. We get our liberties and rights because you have to give the same liberties and rights and due process to people who you don't like and people who may be unsavory as you do to yourself. Because if you don't, you are in danger of losing them for all of us. So, yeah, it matters politically, but it also matters in a democracy, and it matters in a constitutional democracy in particular.
What happens, John Seaton, when the real mass deportations begin, assuming this takes place, and you start seeing family separations and so forth, when we're not talking about hardened criminals like you do in a gang from Venezuela like this? Do the politics, which is what you're pointing us to, change?
Well, yeah, I think it's a fair question. And I do think that there's a lot of work to be done to first focus on those who have broken the law, those who are, again, causing trouble on our soil, those who are in gangs, those who are, creating violence in our schools and in our communities. I do think that the initial targets, if you will, of these deportations will be folks who really have been causing problems here. And again, there have been years, if not decades, of inaction when it comes to dealing with this crisis. And so I do think that is where the focus is going to be, at least in the short term. And I really think, again, that it will be applauded by most voters, by most American people who really don't understand why the government can't do more to keep these communities safe. And so as it progresses, I do think that the administration will keep a very close eye on how the politics are playing. But again, I think at least in the short term, as long as the targets are folks who are in gangs, who are causing trouble in the United States, I think that this is going to be a politically advantageous to the White House.
Do you see that? Jeannie, I know you don't disagree with it, but think of the traction that Donald Trump got talking about Aurora on the campaign trail, an apartment building full of hardened Venezuelan gang members. Is there a difference for you here, politically speaking, when you have folks like this? We're just showing you images of them on YouTube here, shackled, being carried towards this detention center. These are pretty tough guys we're talking about, a lot different than, for instance, family separations that many foresaw when it came to mass deportations.
Yeah, but that's just the point. We don't know who they are. As far as we know, the government has not said what they're charged with. We don't even, quite frankly, know if they are all members of this gang. We are just going on faith that the government is right on that. But that's why we have due process in the United States. You don't, going back well before the founding, just pick people off the street, put them in jail, and throw away the key. Nor do you send them to El Salvador for supermax prisons that are now operating very much like Guantanamo Bay for a payment from a tyrant. You'd give them the due process rights that we fought a revolutionary war for, and you provide them with that. And if they are indeed have committed crimes, they are held responsible. But we follow a process. We are not a lawless country, and that's the point.
Well, we'll see what the judge says, because there's going to be another ruling on this coming, John Seaton. We only have 1 minute left. If this goes to the Supreme Court, do the politics stay in Donald Trump's favor?
I think they do. I think they do. It's unclear, obviously, what the court will decide. It has proven to be quite an independent court, and even the Trump appointees on the court have ruled against the White House in this administration. So, but having said that, I think that people are going to, we'll see how the court decides. I do think the politics remain in the White House's favor as long as the people who are being sent out have kind of met this profile of gang members and folks who have caused violence in our communities.
John Seaton and Jeannie Shanzano, our great panel, will be back in our second hour on Balance of Power as we welcome our global television audience to the conversation. We're going to get into this much more, by the way, with Robert McWhirter, the constitutional lawyer, practicing criminal defense, civil rights lawyer, is going to join us from Arizona, always with a fascinating take on what's happening. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lyons on the way in next, too, so keep it right here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
When Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, begins the briefing, which is expected this hour, and we'll bring you any headlines from it. And as we already mentioned, she's likely to face questions as well around this deportation flight to El Salvador and the alleged gang members who were on board of that aircraft. And joining us now with more on that is Robert McWhirter. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Robert, he, of course, is a constitutional lawyer and practicing criminal defense attorney. When we consider the grounds the administration said it had here in effectively defying the order, they argue they did not. They say the order wasn't applicable because they were in international airspace already by the time that it came down. Will that hold water?
No, that's absurd. Let's say that, for instance, you have an airplane that blows up across the Atlantic Ocean. Everybody knows that the families of the victims can sue in federal court because there's still jurisdiction over that. Now, once it hits another territory, that's a different matter. Once it lands, then the courts lose jurisdiction. But that's really just a very weak argument that they're going to make, that somehow because it's still international, waters or over international waters, that the court does not have jurisdiction. That's just not how the law works.
Well, there are a couple of things to talk about here, Robert, and it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. The idea of using the Alien Enemies Act in this case may also be challenged. What should come of it?
Oh, the Trump administration should lose. This had to have been concocted up by the Trump PR people. I'm guessing this was someplace in the deep recesses of the brain of Stephen Miller, that somehow he came up with this. The legal people would have told him not to do it. But of course, it doesn't matter to Donald Trump. He wants the soundbite. Look, it was part of the Alien Sedition Acts that were passed in 1789 by the Adams administration, the Federalists. It was a big reason why John Adams lost that election to Thomas Jefferson, who promptly did not ever enforce those acts again. They were enforced in the War of 1812 and World War I, but in World War II, they were enforced as part of the justification interring Japanese Americans in concentration camps, which is a disgraceful episode in American legal history, and everybody now recognizes it as such. So the fact that they're doing these old statutes that have been discredited is one thing. The other thing is the statutes themselves say that it's only in time of war that these things apply. The United States was in a quasi-war with France back in 1789. And then, of course, the other three examples are actual wars. This is not a war. The government of Venezuela is not planning to invade the United States of America. So this is just an absurd application of a discredited statute.
Okay, well, then are there other legal means through which you could see the administration accomplishing the same goal, though? They are saying that these are criminals that they are deporting, people who have inflicted harm or, in their words, terrorized Americans. Is there no actual legal mechanism to deport them through alternative means other than the Alien Enemies Act?
Well, of course there is. Now, first of all, they are saying they provided no proof. They haven't even provided the names of these young people who are being deported. So we don't know whether they are not. For all we know, they could march in and arrest the two of you and deport you now under this statute, saying that you're somehow, enemy aliens. There is no control on this, and that's why the statute's discredited. So there's nothing really to show that these are actual criminals. Now, criminals, people who committed crimes, are specifically deportable. The statute's 8 U.S.C. 1227. And the administration has plenty of scope to do that, as the Biden administration did and the Obama administration did. They've always prioritized the deportation of criminal aliens, undocumented criminals. This rhetoric that, Biden let all these rapists and murderers in is simply a lie. This rhetoric that other countries are emptying their jails, that is a lie. That goes back to the Mariel boat people in Cuba way, way back. During, I think it was either the Carter or Reagan administrations. It is simply absurd, and he perpetuates this lie to do something which is a blatant violation of the Constitution.
Well, we heard from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, saying the order was invalid, the judge's order. She wrote, quote, "A single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft carrying foreign alien terrorists who were physically expelled from U.S. soil," unquote. Weigh in on that as you choose, Robert, but is this going to the Supreme Court?
Oh, I think it very likely will go to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has already said about the Alien Sedition Acts in 1964 in New York Times versus Sullivan that the acts have never actually gone to the court, but they have been rebuked in the court of history. In other words, the court of history said that they've always been viewed as suspicious and unconstitutional. So that's the premise in the first place. The application here is absurd. Yeah, it will go to the Supreme Court. This argument about a single judge, that's just the way it works. He issues a temporary injunction that can be appealed in order for the courts to hear the actual merits where the administration can make its case. Nobody's being treated unfairly here at all. And by the way, the Trump administration and kind of the allies of Trump had no problem going down to a judge in the Southern District of Texas, who was the only judge there, to have all of its little things heard to try to enjoin the Biden administration from some of its immigration policies. That's simply how the system works, and they are just defying it. And John Holman seems to be enjoying defying it.
Well, speaking of the Biden administration, Robert, at the very, very end of it, really the last minutes of his presidency, a series of pardons were issued for those affiliated with the January 6th investigation in Congress who are doing that work. President Trump is now arguing, and this is a quote, that those pardons are void, vacant, and of no further force or effect, saying this is because the president used an auto pen to sign them. He hasn't presented any evidence of that, but where do you come down on the argument that it actually nullifies pardons, which are seen as one of the absolute powers of the presidency?
The Constitution says the pardon shall be vested in the President of the United States. It doesn't say how that's affected. In different years, it's been affected in different ways. I mean, I suppose you could go back to the 1700s when they actually just used a seal instead of a signature to give the pardon. So I think that's simply absurd that they're arguing that the manner of signature is somehow a problem. I mean, frankly, if the president wanted to roll it up and put it on the claw of a passenger pigeon and send it out by pigeon, that's perfectly fine. Nothing in the Constitution prohibits that. Biden signed these pardons and that's it. But you should also look at an eye to the politics. If the Trump administration seriously wants to go after Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and all those other people and Fauci, I mean, that would be a public relations nightmare for the Trump administration, because I think these people have backbone and they are perfectly happy to stand up to the whatever absurd charge that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi would concoct in their brains to go after them.
Wow. Do they let you into Washington, Robert? Are we ever going to see you in the nation's capital, or you stay in Arizona for a reason?
Oh, we'll see what holds in the future. It's politics can be a dirty business.
Well, I know that's right, but we like talking with you. We'd love to have you in studio sometime. It's great to have you back here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Robert McWhirter, constitutional lawyer, criminal defense, civil rights lawyer, Maricopa County. Kaylee, we spent so much time talking with Robert during Donald Trump's legal challenges. Remembering the special counsel, Jack Smith. Who would have thought that we'd be at this point talking to him about a sitting president still butting heads with the courts?
Well, and ultimately having fate potentially decided by the Supreme Court. Remember, part of the reason that those Trump cases had to go away was because of a court ruling that found he had at least partial immunity for actions taken as president. Now he's president once again, and his actions are once again in legal question.
It's remarkable stuff, as we learn in real time.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Thank you for being with us here on the Monday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on satellite channel 121, and on YouTube, where we always invite you to join us free of charge. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. Catch our live stream on YouTube for the balance of the program. We've been talking a lot about Nvidia already today. We're going to be talking about it a lot all week. And certainly by the time we get to Jensen Huang's big speech at the Global Artificial Intelligence Conference for Developers, the GTC, it starts today in San Jose, runs through the week. Huang expected to unveil the new Blackwell, right? This is something called Blackwell Ultra. And we'll hear more about its Rubin next generation GPU platform. The analysts are drooling over this. Maybe investors are too, but Nvidia has been a tough story, of course, on Wall Street lately. You're going to hear a lot of people, lots of people claim to be experts, a lot of stock analysts, right? Talk about the technical aspects, the fundies, whether you should buy it or sell it and at what level, whether the AI thing is run out of steam. You hear this stuff all the time, but we want to right now, on this Monday, before we ever get that far, to just take a step back, turn away from the stock for a minute, turn away from your brokerage account, and listen to an important conversation with a real expert here. Not just about Nvidia, but about the AI space overall. It's a conversation that we kind of started here. Think of this as a sequel with Gregory Allen from our conversation following what happened on DeepSeek Monday. We sat together right here on DeepSeek Monday when the market was falling out of bed. And they said this whole AI thing, this whole construct is somehow false. Since then, of course, we've seen the hyperscalers ramp up their spending plans by tens of billions. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about that from Jensen Huang this week. Gregory Allen bored down into this whole thing to come up with an amazing report. This is a 13,000-word dive on DeepSeek, Huawei, export controls, and the future of the U.S.-China AI race. Gregory Allen writing, it would be a great mistake for policymakers to ignore DeepSeek or to suggest that its accomplishments are merely a combination of intellectual property, theft, and misleading Chinese propaganda. Policymakers, he says, need to understand that even while DeepSeek has in some cases simply implemented innovations already known to U.S. AI companies, it has also demonstrated genuine technological breakthroughs of its own that deserve careful consideration as the Trump administration sets its AI policy agenda. He's with us in studio once again, Gregory. Great to see you. Director of the Wadhwani AI Center at CSIS. How did I do?
Dude, great.
Right.
And thanks so much for having me back.
It's great to see you, too. We had an overwhelming response. I can say this on the air, and specifically on YouTube, to your most recent interview with us here. And we wanted to continue the conversation because you've been doing a lot of work. As we wait to hear from Jensen Huang, with what we have learned from DeepSeek and after what you just said, you hear a lot of guys talk about what inning we're in. Because on DeepSeek Monday, they thought the game had just ended. When you hear from Facebook, from Meta, from Google and the others, we're going to put in another $60 billion. We're going to make the biggest data center you ever saw in your life the size of Manhattan. What inning are we in?
Oh, I think we're at most at the bottom of the third.
Wow.
The AI story is still unfolding. And just because every single inning has continued to be shocking doesn't mean we're done yet. When I think about the DeepSeek news and its impact on Nvidia, there were two big arguments out there. One was the idea that, oh my gosh, if we can be so efficient in using these models, then maybe we need fewer Nvidia chips. That was obviously a garbage take.
Yes, right.
Indeed, in AWS cloud provisioning of GPUs, the prices went up that week, right? So as soon as people said, wow, I can be a lot more efficient in using these chips, they wanted more of those chips, not fewer of those chips. But there was a second line of analysis, which is, what about the competitive moat that surrounds NVIDIA? Is NVIDIA really the only game in town? And that's what I dove into with this paper, which is about the potential alliance of DeepSeek and Huawei to create an alternative chip ecosystem that could finally achieve the relevant network effects, the relevant economies of scale, to be a credible competitor to the NVIDIA CUDA software moat.
Wow, this is a horror movie in the making. In that world, are we talking about a competitor that's still using NVIDIA chips by routing them around some third party or something, or in fact working with Taiwan Semiconductor to illegally make chips using technology they shouldn't have? Because you touch on that.
This is a big problem for the export controls. So if you remember, we don't want China to have advanced AI, so we're not going to sell them advanced AI chips. That means we also have to not sell them the equipment used to make those chips, but we also can't let them rent that equipment from places like Taiwan, TSMC. And it turns out, what we've deduced in this report from sources that I spoke to, that TSMC made more than 2 million advanced AI chips for Huawei. Now, this is the Ascend series of chips, which Huawei's chip designers have been working on for a long time. And SMIC, a company in China, is trying to manufacture them, but struggling mightily. So the Assist from TSMC, which is great at making advanced node logic semiconductors, getting 2 million of these chips from them is a big leg up. Now, that's not the end of the story. NVIDIA can still compete. They still have strong advantages. Their chips are not only higher performing, but they're backed by a much more robust software ecosystem, which makes it more desirable to develop on these chips. But if I was NVIDIA, this is the part of the DeepSeek story that I would be concerned about, not the efficiency gains.
Or if you're the Trump White House, should it not be as well? We're cutting deals with TSMC to make foundries here. When what? Should we be sanctioning this company?
U.S. policymakers were enraged to learn this news, and that was the right response, right? We don't want our allies, people who are under the U.S. defense umbrella, providing national security critical capabilities to China. And that's what's going on here. Now, TSMC, of course, they'll say that this was a shell company, meaning that we didn't know it was Huawei, it was somebody pretending not to be Huawei. But when you're making 2 million advanced node semiconductor chips,
amazing.
What kind of due diligence practices do you have in place if you can't detect a sale of that size being Huawei in disguise?
Well, so then, what do we have in place, and what does this mean for export controls? This is like a joke?
So the Biden administration,
Taiwan Semiconductor?
This actually happened in the Biden administration era when these chips were being manufactured, and they introduced a new rule called the Foundry Rule, one of the last actions they took on export controls before leaving office. And it effectively moves all of TSMC from a blacklist model, the entity list, you're not allowed to sell to Huawei, you're not allowed to sell to X, to a whitelist model. You're only allowed to sell to the good guys, and we will tell you who the list of good guys is. So the idea that Huawei could just create another shell company called, Happy Chip Co.
Done.
Doesn't matter. You're not on the whitelist. It doesn't matter if you promise not to be Huawei.
I see.
And any new companies are going to have to be reviewed under a very diligent thing. That's the mess that TSMC has gotten itself into. This failure was so big that things are never going to be the same for them in terms of doing due diligence on new customers.
Incredible to think that this is going on here. And if you're Jensen Huang, you're wondering about the security of your own IP here, of course, right?
Yes, I mean, Nvidia has been the victim of major cyber attacks that got pretty dang close to the crown jewels. Now, counterintuitively, these were not even state-run actors. This is reporting done by Wired a few years ago. These were folks who just wanted to use Nvidia chips for Bitcoin mining, and they were mad when Nvidia adopted a policy prohibiting that. And so they started cyber attacking Nvidia and saying, we will release all your critical intellectual property until and unless unless you lift this Bitcoin mining ban. Right. I mean, that is shocking that just a cyber criminal outfit was able to get so close to the crown jewels of Nvidia. Right. It makes you wonder, when we're dealing with a nation state such as China, and they have their crosshairs aimed at Nvidia, at OpenAI, at everybody who has really valuable AI intellectual property, it's a big challenge.
Boy, this is all pretty scary stuff. We're going to go into overtime with you. You don't have to leave yet, right?
Mm-hmm. No.
Because this is too important, and our listeners and viewers find this incredibly compelling. When you consider the findings that you have made here, it also suggests that this whole DeepSeek revelation was based on theft. Is that not the truth? IP theft, actual hardware theft? Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken place. But you're saying that doesn't matter. They still did things with these tools that are worth our attention.
So this is what's interesting. The trope about Chinese tech companies used to be they cannot innovate, they can only copy.
That's right.
I think the right way to think about DeepSeek is they copy when they can, and they innovate when they can. It is an all-of-the-above approach to competition with the United States, and that's what makes it such a real challenge. Now, if you're somebody like Nvidia, you see DeepSeek making highly efficient AI models. That's great. That means more people are going to want to use your chips. If you're Nvidia, the real threat is Huawei, because Huawei has advanced AI chip design that they're trying to get the Chinese government to force everybody to buy on. Because Nvidia would love to still sell in China. They have to sell a degraded version of their chip that's legal under export control law. But Huawei says, we want the Chinese government to not even allow us to buy these degraded Nvidia chips. We want them to force Chinese customers to buy Huawei chips. So now you're down to what is the actual competitive advantage of Nvidia? And it comes down to software. Nvidia, the reason why they're worth so much money is not that their chips are so amazing. If you look at an AMD, which is an American competitor of Nvidia, and an Nvidia chip, they're both great chips on the hardware side. Where Nvidia has a massive edge is on the software side. Everything is compatible with NVIDIA chips. They're backwards compatible. They're forwards compatible. All the big AI software development environments are compatible with NVIDIA. And if you leave NVIDIA chips, you have to leave that happy software ecosystem, and all of your software starts breaking. You have to create a bunch of new stuff from scratch. That's what's dangerous. And that's what Huawei wants to attack, and what they would love to use DeepSeek to jumpstart. Can they get DeepSeek to start developing attractive AI software on the Huawei ecosystem, to start building some critical scale economies, network effects in this alternative ecosystem? That's what NVIDIA should be worried about on a 2-year time frame, on a 5-year time frame, on a 10-year time frame.
So if you're Jensen Huang, this is a real bummer, because you wish you could sell your chips to Huawei or have that market, right? But if it were shut down, if China were cut off, and it's pretty close to being there already, I guess, for a company like NVIDIA, as opposed to some of the others that make lower tech chips, wouldn't the company continue to grow at an enormous rate? We're going to hear about backlogs, right? We're going to hear about a pipeline. We're going to hear about Rubin, Blackwell Ultra, that they can't make them fast enough.
Exactly.
So who cares about China if you're NVIDIA?
For every chip that comes off the assembly line, designed by NVIDIA, there are 10 people saying, please let me buy that chip, because they are supply constrained. They are not demand constrained. So that is the current situation that they're facing, and it will continue to be the situation for many years in the future. It's really, if you're thinking about the long-term thing, and remember about NVIDIA's valuation. Almost all of the value in the stock price is the terminal valuation, not the 5 next years of cash flow generation. It's what they think is going to be the future. And NVIDIA is saying, right now, we have these competitive dynamics in place where it seems clear that there could not even be a company that could give rise to an alternative ecosystem that's anywhere near as competitive as ours. And as they're looking at this Huawei DeepSeek alliance, for the first time they're seeing, this is not much right now, but this could grow into something pretty significant.
This is incredible. I had a very smart analyst suggest to me that when NVIDIA rolls out Blackwell Ultra this week, that we shouldn't be taken by this. It's just another very expensive chip. when Nvidia starts putting forth new cheap chips that do this, that's when you have the breakthrough. Is that true?
Well, I think they're doing both things simultaneously.
Are they?
I mean, they have the chip that costs hundreds of dollars, and they have the chips that cost tens of thousands of dollars. And overall, I think they are still competitive in both markets. What your analyst might have been talking about is Nvidia's gap in mobile, right? If you think about the next generation iPhone, it's going to have Apple Intelligence on it. Is that being delivered by Nvidia chips? No, it's being delivered by chips designed by Apple. And if you think about that, Nvidia is dominant in the data center. They're very strong in PC. They're very strong in laptop. But on mobile, that's sort of the question mark for what does the future of intelligence. And Qualcomm would love to say, we're going to win.
Yeah.
Apple would love to say, we're going to win.
Sure.
But the future is unwritten here, and that's the question mark for Nvidia.
All right. Spending time with Gregory Allen here from the Wadhwani AI Center, CSIS, on balance of power. It's such a great conversation. We wanted to bring this into overtime for you when we consider where we're going here in our remaining couple of moments with the future of AI and what this means for the Trump administration. You're laying out some really important ideas. Is this White House capable of embracing them and turning it into policy?
So I think this administration, if you look at who they've hired, especially in roles that are relevant to export controls, that are relevant to technology competition with China. It is technology. It is China hawk, China hawk, China hawk, China hawk. I mean, the most hawkish people in the Biden administration, people I know in the Trump administration said, they would be a dove compared to the kind of folks that we're bringing in here.
Okay.
But there is a question between political will and government capacity. And if you look at the organization that's in charge of enforcing export controls, they're looking to cut staff right now when what they should be doing is increasing staff. And then secondarily, if you look at the Department of Justice, the group that has the specific responsibility for enforcing export controls, that group has just been disbanded. And the Department of Justice has not yet said where those duties and responsibilities are going to be divvied up. So we are in a position where we have bet the farm on export controls as a critical means of technology competition with China, but the government capacity to execute that strategy is being removed, and there's no plan right now to what's going to bolster it back. So I'm really urging folks I know in the Trump administration, fix this. We need a stronger government ability to do this. This is not a great place for money-saving cuts because you're going to save pennies and you're going to lose hundreds of billions of dollars in American, value.
This might have to be our next conversation because this is incredibly important right now, the extent to which the administration is paying attention to this because it has so many plates spinning at once. Let's get back to the toy store quickly before you leave. In our remaining moment here, you say we're at the, I believe, bottom of the third. We've heard a lot about reference turning to inference. What's next? What is the next breakthrough that we need to see in AI?
Well, I think so far we've seen AI become increasingly capable at generating text that is actually of value. Recall that Sam Altman said in early 2024 that the performance of his system was, quote, mildly embarrassing at best, right? That was not that long ago. Now he's saying it's among the top 100 programmers on planet Earth. You've seen that the hirings for people who are generating computer code are way down as people are realizing that these systems can generate extremely high quality code almost instantaneously. So the labor market disruptions from AI, they're here now. And as those capabilities first go after engineering-focused tasks where formal verification is possible, they're going to spread to ever more parts of the economy, and that's going to lead to a wave of adoption of AI and generating real value. It's not a toy anymore. Now it's really solving business problems. So that's what 2025 is.
We're beyond the toy department at this point. You have 3 young kids. Will they write all of their school essays using AI? How does this not take over everything that we do that's driven from an intellectual point?
I think it's really worth asking. I mean, one thing that you could tell yourself is in the 1950s, there was no such thing as a job called a programmer, right?
Sure.
As we created new technologies, we created new jobs associated with those technologies. But we do have to ask ourselves the question, as these things become more and more capable, and to use the words of folks like Sam Altman or other folks, these are going to be capable of doing anything that a computer can do, anything that a human can do in front of a laptop. That then begs the question, what are the next jobs? What is the future of education? And while there's plenty of exciting opportunities of using AI for one-on-one tutoring type things to strengthen education. There's this question of what is the goalpost? What is the job that you are aiming at? And I think it's very unclear just how capable these systems are getting and what's going to be left for humans to do when my kids, graduate from high school, graduate from college.
I can't wait we all can't wait to get the answers to these questions, right? Just let me know when I need the Neuralink chip. That's all I ask. Gregory Allen, great to see you as always from CSIS. We brought him back for you and went into overtime in another fascinating conversation with the director of the Wadhwani AI Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We'll keep tabs on Jensen Huang and, of course, the big Nvidia conference over the course of the week.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We watch tech shares, not the most enthusiasm here, but that goes kind of for the markets overall. Kaylee, following the comments from the Treasury Secretary yesterday, it was a big question about what would happen. He's not a big a worry of mine when it comes to corrections. He says they're healthy, actually. Don't want to go straight up. Don't want to go straight down either, I think would be part of that. But also, when it comes to the question of a recession, he sat down for an interview on Meet the Press, remembering Donald Trump didn't rule one out. And I suppose he didn't either. No. Here's what Scott Besson had to say.
That there are no guarantees. Like who would have predicted COVID, right? So I can predict that we are putting in robust policies that will be durable. And could there be an adjustment? Because I tell you that this massive government spending that we'd had, that if that had kept going, we have to wean our country off of that. And on the other side, we are going to invigorate the private sector.
The Treasury Secretary on NBC News. Of course, there is great concern, Kaylee, about the economy. It's borne out in the stock market. It's borne out in the bond market. And a lot of confusion about what the president wants to do next when it comes to tariffs specifically.
Yeah, it's been borne out in polling as well. If you look at the latest NBC polling that came out over the weekend, CNN polling that had come out before that, a suggestion that while voters largely who supported Trump supported him on the grounds of expecting he would have a better economy under him, don't necessarily feel like steps have been taken in that direction to actually lead to the tangible improvement just yet.
Not a lot of polling data around, and that may actually be a good thing. Sometimes we get bogged down in the numbers here, and the anecdotal work that's been done by Center Forward is really something. It's a great piece of work here, talking with voters, a couple of dozen voters, about their feelings about any number of issues, including the economy. And Corey Kramer is the CEO of Center Forward, joining us right now here on Balance of Power. Corey, welcome. As I look at what you heard about the economy, voters overwhelmingly concluded the economy and cost of living are the most important issues for the administration. Many, including some of his supporters, you write, disapproved of Donald Trump's handling of the economy, citing anxiety about tariffs and frustration about inflation. What happened to animal spirits?
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me, Joe and Kaylee. Really appreciate it. You're right. There was a lot of interesting data that came out of our research. And I think the three words that I sort of take away from our research are anxiety, disengagement, and also hope.
Okay, well, let's talk about the anxiety portion first, if we can, not to start on the negative, but the anxiety around the economy does not yet seem like it has been alleviated, even with President Trump in office, although especially among the Trump voters you talked to, out of these 35 that were involved in this research, voted for him because of the economy and his handling of the economy. What exactly is the disconnect between what people are feeling and what they're seeing so far from the administration?
The things that the voters really pointed out, particularly the Trump voters that we followed through the three phases of this research, were that they were expecting a little bit more economy-related action in the first couple of months of the Trump administration. And they're seeing a lot about foreign affairs and engagements with our allies. They're seeing a lot of things on immigration and DOJ. And while they are very concerned about the direction and how much effect the Trump administration is having on the economy, they still do remain hopeful.
I want to hear about the tune-out, because a lot of people just find it easier to stop watching, stop listening when things either get to be confusing or frustrating? And it sounds to me, Corey, like we have both.
It's true. So Center Forward, we've been the premier engager of bipartisan programming for the last 15 years in DC. And we thought it was really important to look at how voters were engaging in cross-party discussions. In addition to discussions with friends, family, how were they engaging with news, social media platforms? And so this research was really different from a lot of research that you find. And then it was conducted in 3 different phases. First one was immediately pre-election. The second was immediately post-election. And then the third phase was just a few weeks ago, a couple of months into the Trump administration. And we followed these same voters and asked them to diary in response to questions that we asked them. The disengagement that we're finding over political discourse is quite alarming, particularly for an organization like Center Forward that really focuses on having those thoughtful conversations, finding compromise and common ground. And there is a great deal of disengagement, particularly among women who are creating many more boundaries for themselves in order to preserve their mental health. And that includes not just stepping away from social media and news, but also parameters around how they're engaging with neighbors, friends, work colleagues. I will say the one thing that is encouraging to me is that overwhelmingly, the majority of folks have identified an area in which they have engaged with people of other positions. And as a result of those conversations, have either softened their views or come to a greater understanding. So the lesson that we've learned from this is that those who go into conversations looking to change someone else's mind are finding the least value in those engagements. But the ones who really go into those conversations looking from a place of curiosity and attempting to educate themselves are finding a great deal of value of engaging in cross-party dialogue.
So that's cross-party dialogue, Corey. I'm also interested in intra-party dialogue or dismay, perhaps, if you're Democratic voters specifically. Among the ones you talk to, I'm quoting here from the research, they say they, quote, aren't sure what the party stands for these days, and especially what we all witnessed last week, a House Democratic caucus that voted against a Republican-backed government funding measure, a Senate Democratic caucus that was fractured and ultimately supporting it, led by the minority leader, Chuck Schumer. It does seem like a party that isn't quite sure where it stands, and that's being reflected in the people you're speaking with.
You're right, Kaylee. It was reflected in the research. And those, when we asked them about how their perceptions of various parties, would be Democratic or Republican Party, the voters who were identifying the perceptions of the Democratic Party were really looking for more communication from the party on what they stand for and how to better engage. You're right. It's very much about communication.
Producer James just put a New York Post story in front of us here. Embattled New York City Mayor Eric Adams reveals he stopped reading the news. Quote, I sleep so much better, Corey. What does that mean for the rest of us who are trying to do this every day?
I know, it's tough. It's tough. We have not yet seen the bounce back. I was hoping a few months into the new administration that we were going to see a bounce back and people engaging with the news, but it is a slow-going process. There is still a great deal of disengagement across their modes of relationships and communication. But I foresee that we were going to continue this research in a phase 4 and potentially a phase 5. And I'm optimistic that we're going to see people bouncing back to engagement and hopefully with media as well.
Well, we hope you'll come back and share those updated results with us. Corey Kramer, CEO of Center Forward, on their new research, talking to 35 voters in the aftermath of the election. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.